Hello everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Nighttime can be oh so fascinating, seeing everything in a different light, or better, the lack of light. Sometimes the dark just offers the calm, quiet that we're looking for. But more often than not, for some, the dark itself acts as a door to something even darker. At one time, certain sleep conditions were even more mysterious to us than they are now. Inescapable nightmares, sleep paralysis demons. Though they fit the narrative of a horror story, technically those things can't hurt us. Or can they? Because not everyone walks away from these experiences unscathed, physically or emotionally. And what about those other things, the more tangible things that come for us in the night, preying on people in their most vulnerable state? Tonight's stories offer us insight into both kinds of nightmares, the ones that happen while we sleep, and the ones that happen while we're wide awake. And yes, they're both terrifying. So, let's get started, shall we? When both my parents went to jail on drug charges, instead of being thrown into the system, my grandma agreed to take guardianship of me. And so at age 11, I was sent on a plane by myself to Twin Falls, Idaho, to live for a couple of months. Her house was a small 2-bedroom rambler. She hadn't finished cleaning the second bedroom, so the first couple of days, I was expected to sleep on the couch in the living room. This was not only a bummer, but her front windows were eye level with a relatively busy neighborhood street. She had a small grass front yard with a short chain-link fence to separate her property from the sidewalk, and even with the shades closed, I'd be paranoid about people seeing in. The first few nights, I heard noises coming from the attic. I tried to ignore them, hoping I was just scaring myself in this new environment. I hadn't yet become familiar with the creaks of this settling house, and every bump would make me pull the covers over my head and pray for sleep. One morning, I woke up to find my backpack of clothes had been dumped all over the floor. When my grandma woke up, I asked if she'd dumped out my bag. Walking over to look at the small pile of clothes on the ground, she jokingly suggested my Grandpa Franklin played a trick on me. But Grandpa Franklin had died near the end of last year. He was my grandma's brother. They were best of friends up until he passed. They'd purchased the house together when they retired. Grandma shakes her finger at the ceiling, saying, "You leave her alone, Frankie." Then walks into the kitchen to make breakfast. That morning, I flat out ask her if she thinks Grandpa Franklin is haunting the house, or if she was just pulling my leg. She tells me that she thinks he visits often. Sometimes he plays little tricks on her, letting her know that he's still with her. This weird solace made my grandmother feel comfort, but it made me feel even more uncomfortable. I told her about the noises in the attic. She said she hears them too. Grandpa Franklin had a little art studio up there. Now, every week, Grandma climbs up the attic stairs, all to pick up the easels and paintings that were knocked over during the night. He hides her jewelry. Some items she's still not been able to find. Grandpa Franklin had a sense of humor that he'd taken to the afterlife, but I was assured he meant no harm. I tried to digest her information with breakfast that day, and was secretly terrified for the sun to go down and my strict 9 p.m. bedtime to arrive. I woke up once in the middle of the night to use the restroom. I used to try not to drink anything after 7, so I didn't have to do this frantic dash in the dark. But Grandma had taken me to a movie earlier, and I'd filled myself up on popcorn and soda. I had to go. The house was completely dark, and I try to navigate my way to the bathroom. When I get in the doorway and flip on the light, it illuminates the stretch of hall, and in the opposite direction, I see the wooden stairs of the attic. They've been unfolded and opened to the floor. I lock the bathroom door behind me and hopelessly think of a plan to help me get back to my couch bed, hidden under layers of blankets. When I'm done, I slowly open the door again, the light once more reflecting off the retracted stairs. When I turn the light off, my stomach reaches up to my throat, and I close my eyes while running back to the living room. Landing back onto the couch, I dig under the covers. Hyperventilating, I hesitate, pulling the covers over my head. My eyes are readjusting to the dark after the bathroom, and in the corner of the living room, the shape of a person begins to define itself, along with the counter and entertainment center they're standing next to, completely still. From what I can make out, it looks like they're facing my direction. This makes me dart my head under the covers, fully enclosing myself in my safety shell for the remaining hours of that night. The attic was closed again when I woke up in the morning. Again, I tell my grandma what happened. She empathizes by saying Grandpa Franklin's keeping an eye on his granddaughter, and he checks on her a lot too. But seeing that figure really shakes me up. Grandpa Franklin was a tall, portly man. What I saw didn't resemble his frame. Its build was smaller, much thinner than I remember my grandpa being. I start sleeping with an open pocket knife under my pillow. It was 3 inches and all I had to protect myself against an entity I'd convinced myself wasn't part of the family. It would be the early hours of Easter morning that I'd meet it again. Awoken by the sound of deep, labored breathing, sitting just outside my blanket wall. Exhales too heavy and too deep to be my grandma's. I slowly grab the pocket knife and prepared to swing. It sounds like they're directly above me. I count. 3, 2, 1. Then, while laying on my side, I pull the blanket down with one hand, and with the other, I quickly jab the pocket knife out into the dark. To my complete horror, I make contact with something solid. The impact makes a sickening thud, and I feel the blade forcefully pierce through a dense mass. Before I have a chance to scream, the figure lets out a loud holler, falling backwards through the coffee table near the couch. The crash alerts my grandma, and she's up in the living room with the lights on in a matter of seconds. In front of us, lying in the broken glass and wood of the table, is a man, writhing in agony. The pocket knife is embedded into his face, deep enough to stand on its own. The man had hit the back of his head on the corner of the entertainment center when he fell, and he began to convulse into seizures. My grandma calls the cops, and they show up with the paramedics within a few minutes, and they take the bleeding stranger out of my grandma's living room. So, we'd come to find out that a crackhead had actually broken into my grandma's house a few months ago, coming and going through the window in the attic. Turns out, Grandpa Franklin's paranormal trick of hiding jewelry was actually a crackhead stealing and pawning my grandma's stuff at every pawn shop in Twin Falls. She was heartbroken. I don't know what was worse, the feeling of violation or finding out all these little signs of hope that she'd been collecting were false. I'm grateful we were never hurt. I'm also grateful that I could be there for my grandma. She was depressed and lonely without Grandpa Franklin, I think the little bumps and knocks that she heard helped her feel less alone, but I can't imagine what it would have been like for her to find that man on her own. In 2015, I had a baby, and I think something bad followed us home from the hospital. Either that or something was attached to my ex, because he also moved in around that time. He was a dark person who found demons interesting, and he was going through an addiction, so I wouldn't be surprised if he brought it. Soon after giving birth, I noticed a presence in the bedroom while we were staying at my parents' house. My boyfriend also heard a woman singing in there and thought that it was my grandma's ghost. It was her old room. Then I started having nightmares about a tall, bony woman with long, stringy hair. I strongly felt her presence in that room, and I'd see her the moment I closed my eyes. Before the baby, the room felt totally normal, but I became so frightened of it that I began avoiding it entirely until bedtime. Every time I opened the door, I expected to see her. I felt crazy, so I didn't tell anyone. But then, my ex woke up with scratches all over his chest and back after a nightmare about a demonic woman. He described the exact same figure I was dreaming about. The only choice was to continue avoiding the room during the day and dealing with the creepy feelings at night. But after the relationship ended, the nightmares subsided. One night, I stayed up all night cleaning and reorganizing the living room while my daughter and my parents were asleep upstairs. At 3 a.m., I heard a woman singing in the bedroom.
Merrily, 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 life is but a dream.
I thought it was Mom, but she was asleep, and my daughter had no toys that sang that. We moved out a few years later, and there were no more encounters. I mostly forgot about the scary woman until last year. I had a dream about her. My husband was away on business, so my daughter slept with me. In the dream, I was laying with her exactly the same way, except we were in the bedroom from my parents' house. I was facing the closet, and the lady was standing there, just looking at us. Then I fell asleep in the dream, only to wake up in another, where I became semi-lucid. I knew I was dreaming, but something felt off, and I was uncomfortable. I shouted, "I want to wake up." But I only woke up in that room again, and the woman was still standing there, staring at my daughter. And that's when I actually woke up to my daughter crying and shaking me, asking, "Is she real?" My stomach dropped. I asked, "Is who real?" To which she eventually replied, "The lady in the bedroom at Mimi's house." Now, I'm wide awake and terrified. I asked what the lady looked like. She described the same one, except she said the woman had wheels instead of legs. I asked if she'd ever seen that lady at Mimi's house before, but she didn't know, because she wasn't sure if those instances were dreams or reality. My daughter scares easily, so I said I didn't think the woman was real. I feel like it would be best for her to forget. Thankfully, we haven't had any more dreams since. A month ago, my boyfriend and I were home watching a scary movie, 9 p.m. He has a personal phone as well as one for work. After the movie, I said I was going to start a shower and wait for him to join me. He used his personal phone to call his daughter and then left both phones on the couch. He said he was going to grab some clothes and be right back. But after going into the bedroom, he noticed that his personal phone was no longer on the couch. He'd only been gone for a minute. He looked for it everywhere before finally giving up and getting into the shower. He told me what happened, and I promised to help him find it when we got out. After the shower, we spent another 5 minutes tearing the house apart, but still couldn't find it. We both called it several times, but we couldn't hear it. Eventually, I thought of tracking its location. That's when it showed up, in our neighbor's front yard. He thought I was joking until I showed him the screen. Neither of us had left the house, and both doors were still locked. I actually thought he was pranking me, but he promised he wasn't. I stood in the doorway as he went outside with a flashlight and called his phone again. He looked for a while, and then I watched him dig in our neighbor's bushes, and he pulls out a flashing phone. It had been raining. It was very muddy, yet his phone was completely dry and seemingly untouched. It never rang during that time, only vibrated, but the ringer had been on. We can't explain any of it. An update. Strange things have been happening ever since this incident. Stuff has been knocked over in the middle of the night. I hear footsteps when I'm alone, and I see things out of the corner of my eyes. We have light fixtures that you click on and off with a flat button, not switches. My boyfriend and I were sitting on the couch when all of a sudden, the dining room lights began turning on and off. They weren't just flickering. We could hear the buttons being clicked rapidly, as if someone were physically pressing them. My boyfriend said that he's never experienced anything like this before I moved in. After reading some comments, I'm beginning to think that some sort of entity might be attached to me. I've had other paranormal experiences before, so it's possible. I grew up in a haunted town. When I was younger, I went to an event and I saw a neon blue orb, but it was shaped more like the dog from A Nightmare Before Christmas. I was the only one who noticed it, but it didn't feel strange or out of place. Our house was in a cul-de-sac next to a forest, and when standing at the edge of the woods, you could always hear a creaking noise. Sounded like a screen door opening and closing. Then, as I got older, it sounded more like a swinging noose. I never worked up the courage to look for the source, but it still gives me the creeps when I think about it. Several years later, when I was 17, I was on my way to get my sister from work. She got off at midnight, and there was a cemetery on the road leading to her job. On the sidewalk, there was a barefoot woman with long brown hair, wearing a white gown. It gave me chills, the way she stared at me, so I hurried away. Several months later, at midnight on New Year's Eve, my friends described seeing the exact same woman. This happened while my parents were vacationing in Southwest America. They got some food and started talking to a local who said that there was a box canyon on the way to their next stop. A box canyon is characterized by being narrow, having high vertical walls and a flat bottom. My mom makes it sound like he described it with an almost spiritual reverence, saying that it was incredibly beautiful, had superb acoustics, and he loved taking his guitar out there. My folks like doing stuff off the beaten path, so they decided to go. The canyon was isolated, and there were no buildings for miles. By the time they parked and made it to the canyon's entrance, The sun was just starting to set. They thought that they were the only ones there. They didn't see any other parked cars as they made their way into the canyon. Both of my parents started to feel a touch uneasy, but they blamed the fact that it was getting dark and the canyon walls were pressing close together. They kept going until they heard the noise. They both describe it differently. Dad says it sounded like a person, possibly a man, saying a low single word that he didn't understand. My mom says that it didn't sound like a word of any kind to her, just a strange, deep noise that rang out from somewhere nearby. It was accompanied by a brief, intense flash of pale light, just a few feet from where they stood. Neither of them knew what it was, but it lingered in the air for a moment before fading away. They were immediately filled with dread and a desperate need to leave the canyon. They hurried back to their car, and as they exited the dark canyon, Mom felt certain something was chasing them. Thankfully, they were able to get away, but Mom said she didn't feel safe until they had driven for a while. She couldn't get rid of the feeling that they were being pursued. When they eventually spoke of it, they weren't able to make any real sense of what happened. A few months ago, my father-in-law had a heart attack and hit his head. He's now brain dead in a medical facility, but his country doesn't allow the withdrawal of life support. Instead, he's being kept alive on a ventilator until his natural death, if you can call it that. Ever since this happened, I've been having waking visions of him in an old-school Soviet-era bureaucratic office, trying to claim his body. Each day, he works his way through the queues of 5 windows in order to get all the paperwork and stamps needed to return home. But it always ends the same. When he gets to the front of the line, time has run out, and the bureaucratic slams the window shut with instructions to come back tomorrow. Some days he gets closer than others, but it's never enough. My neighbor's mother comes from generations of women with the gift. So I asked if her mother could communicate with him since he's in this in-between place, but she couldn't. That's not how it works. She can only communicate with the fully dead. She did advise that the family should tell him that it's okay to go towards the light, but I didn't have the heart to tell them. 2 weeks later, my neighbor and her mother were doing a reading, and the mother got a message, one that I needed to tell the family because my father-in-law, he doesn't fully realize he's dead. He's lost. They also used his nickname, but I never even told them his actual name. I don't know what to make of this. I'm a 27-year-old male. I live in a small German town. My parents bought their dream home the year after I was born, and we moved into it the following year, 1997. Everything was fine until the late 2000s when a salesman from a grocery store chain tried to buy every house on the street so the store could expand. This was the beginning of an ordeal that lasted for nearly 10 years. It didn't end until my father passed away, and we were forced to sell the house for far less than expected, since Dad left a huge debt in mine and my mother's name. He was mentally ill. Today, my mother said the paperwork is finally done, and the store is going to demolish every house on the street before the month's end. While talking, she mentioned wanting to put a rose in our old house before it's demolished, and I still had a spare key. While inside, I felt a cold breeze and started smelling mothballs, like someone with a bag full of them had just walked by. When I went out back, I stood in the middle of the small courtyard, and something pressed into my shoulder. I wasn't able to physically move or breathe for a moment, and I felt like I was being watched the whole visit. The mothball smell followed me the whole time. Mom said she used to occasionally smell mothballs and feel cold breezes when she still lived in the house, and she thought it was because of all the ghosts. That was the whole reason she wanted to leave a rose. The house was built in around 1628, but was partially burned down in the 1700s. We believe there used to be a connection to the church up the hill, but we were never able to prove it, even though we've seen the original plans. They show a pair of stairs leading down to where the living room used to be. Did I encounter a spirit? Why was I the only one it ever touched? Can anyone tell me? I had the same nightmare every night for over 10 years. I was always running down an endless hallway, no visible doors, windows, or lights. And I knew there was something chasing me, so I just kept running. I never got tired either. A couple of months ago, the dream changed. The hallway walls fell down, and the path turned into a treadmill. So I was always running in place. Eventually, I fell down and finally saw what had been chasing me. The figure was at least 7 feet tall, pitch black, but it was also sort of shiny. Its body was very thin but round, its head shaped like a siren. It had 9 arms with 7-inch claws for fingers, and its limbs were much smaller than its torso. I crawled backwards to get away, but it reached out, trying to grab me, and I woke up the moment its claws touched my foot. Then I found a fairly deep cut on my foot, exactly where it touched me. I definitely didn't have a cut there when I went to sleep. I work night shifts at a hotel, and I ended up talking to a nice couple who wanted to explore the property. They hadn't wanted to return to their room yet, and we happened to be discussing the paranormal. It was 2:30 a.m., and I looked behind them to see the exact thing from my nightmare walking onto the hotel property. I accidentally yelled at the sight, which caused the guests to turn their heads right as it was fading away, but they still caught a glimpse. None of us could explain it, so we let the conversation end there. They returned to their room, and I furiously checked the cameras to see if they caught what we saw, but nothing showed up. I saw a lot of scary things as a child, and the worst happened in my bedroom when I was 12. You can be skeptical, but I know what I saw. I woke up at 2, rolled over to face my door. Someone was crouched in the corner, next to the bookshelf, and I was suddenly wide awake. I could tell it was a woman, long, dark hair, so I called out, thinking it was my sister, but she didn't respond. I kept saying I could see her, and to grab what she needed so she could go back to bed. Finally, she began to stand up, very slowly. I still couldn't see her face, just the hair and a white dress. But that's when I saw she was way too tall to be my little sister. I called out to my mom next, but still didn't get a response. I began shaking, crying, screaming at the top of my lungs. I backed into the corner, and she slowly shuffled out of my room, sideways, without even taking her eyes off of me. I told my dad someone might be in the house. My whole family woke up in a panic. We did a thorough search and found nothing. But I still didn't sleep the rest of the night. I don't think anyone believes me, but I'll never forget this experience. It was truly horrifying. Thankfully, I haven't had any other experiences like this. My whole life I've felt uneasy, like I'm constantly being watched by something. It happens the worst at night or when I'm trying to go to sleep. My sisters experience it too, and it genuinely scares us, but we try to laugh it off, joking that we've been cursed. It's significantly worsened since I moved into my boyfriend's house. One day, I woke up to what sounded like someone repeatedly tapping on the wall right above my head. I sounded so distraught when I called him that he left work immediately. I've also had a few sleep paralysis experiences, which have never happened to me before this. The first time I thought I woke up to the sound of someone walking down our hallway, and then right before they would have been at our doorway, I woke up. But I was in the exact position I'd been in my dream. Then today, I thought I woke up to my boyfriend standing in the doorway with our dogs, but I quickly realized I wasn't fully awake. I tried to go back to sleep. That's when I heard my boyfriend say, "Hi, babe." But when I opened my eyes, a man with glowing yellow eyes was crouched down next to the bed, staring at me. I tried to say no a few times. Once again, I woke up in the same position as I had in my dream. I should also mention that my mental health was at an extreme low today, and I know that can make you more susceptible. What does this mean? Should I be concerned? I don't really know much about sleep paralysis. Well, friends, that's it for tonight's episode. But don't miss a brand new one every Friday night, and my other weekly uploads every Sunday and Wednesday. Don't forget to like this video, turn on notifications, and of course, talk to me in the comments. I want to thank those who shared their stories, and a big thanks to all of you for listening. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me. amandadarkesthour@gmail.com or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, the Darkest Hour YT. And a huge shout out to all of my patrons whom I appreciate so very much. Thank you. TRACY S, TAMARA K, Monica L, ZOEWATT, Shelly B, Donald C, Rat Girl, ALISHA S, ERIN G, NIKKI H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendan G, Paul T, Nicholas C, LISSANE, ARLENE F, and the Darkest Hour's newest patron, ADRIENNE. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour or click the link in the description to learn more. Thanks everyone, and stay spooky.